Hoops podcast, where we talk about all things hoops, whether it's the NBA, college basketball, youth sports, you name it. If it's about hoops, we talk about it here. But as you know, right, the NBA playoffs are currently in the thick of things, and we got to start here, right? We got to start here first and foremost, and this is what I'm going to spend today on this live talking about, and that is the Denver Nuggets getting absolutely hemmed up, taken to school, abused, whatever terminology or wording you want to use for what happened yesterday versus the Minnesota Timberwolves to close out that first round series is what we're going to be talking about today. Far too often, we hear the greats in the basketball space get spat on, right? Whether it's Kobe Bryant, whether it's LeBron James, right? You hear these smear campaigns of all of these great players and their shortcomings. So to me, it's fitting to do the same to one of the most protected NBA basketball players we have seen over the course of their career. A guy who has been great, right? We're not going to diminish the accomplishments that he has had throughout the course of his career, right? Winning an NBA championship, being a three-time MVP. But it is important if we are going to hold Nikola Jokic to the same standard and put him in conversations with guys that I personally have not seen him be in the conversations with yet, then we have to treat the negative spots in his career the same way. You get what I'm saying? So, without further ado, let's just talk about it. Let's break down what happened. Let's break down the series more generally, and then let's get specifically into Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray because I thought those two combined played one of the worst series of playoff basketball in recent memory. To be fully transparent with you guys, so what happened? The Minnesota Timberwolves came in as the underdogs in the series versus the Denver Nuggets. I think a lot of us saw what was happening heading into this series, right? What had happened over the course of the regular season. And if we're going to be real about Minnesota, and me going into this series being fully accountable, did not pick Minnesota to win this series, right? I thought during the regular season they were lackadaisical for much of that season. They didn't compete consistently on defense. And I think it's fair to say when you have a team like Minnesota who their younger core is very much still entering their prime, right? You got Anthony Edwards getting better every year. You got Nas Reed getting better every year. You got Jaden McDaniels getting better every year. Um, and with that, seeing a decline in their regular season production, in their defensive production, more specifically, says a lot, right? Because you were still a young team with a lot of athletes that is consistently on the downtick, right? That doesn't make sense to me. You get what I'm saying? I feel like Minnesota has the roster, has the capability to be as impactful of a defense as the Detroits of the world, as the OKCs of the world, and for them to be this young in their careers and already picking and choosing when they're going to play hard, I think says a lot about where they were at heading into the playoffs, and is why I was hesitant to pick them in a series. Right, one, it was Anthony Edwards' health. Two, it was that we've seen since the 23-24 season when they first made it to the conference finals. That was the best defense in the NBA. That was a defense that was getting talked about in the same breath as the way we talk about OKC right now, the way we talk about Detroit right now. And to see them steadily decline, I think says a lot about where their focus was at during the regular season, and more specifically, how reliant that they have become on Rudy Gobert up to this point, right? Like throughout the course of the regular season this season, their defense turned much more into Rudy's going to protect us, right? Like he's going to be the vessel in which our defense keeps us competitive in games, as opposed to having an awesome perimeter defense like they have had in the past. So going into this series, that is why I picked Denver to win. You know what I'm saying? That's why I picked Denver to win. I just didn't trust that Minnesota was going to be able to turn it on the way that they did, especially with Anthony Edwards going into that series banged up with his knee injury. But again, I take full accountability for being dead wrong, because what we saw in this series was an absolute bullying, right? Like Minnesota took these boys to school. It started with Rudy Gobert, right? If you would have told me that Rudy Gobert throughout the course of a 6-game series was going to outplay and be more impactful than Nikola Jokic, I would have told you were lying. But he was, right? Even in the last 2 games where Joker's stats started to look more in line with what he was doing in the regular season, those stats did not translate the same way you might think that they would have, right? Meaning, yeah, he had, I think, 28, 9, and 10 last night, but still on the margins, it wasn't there, right? The competitiveness to fight for loose balls, you know, to win on the margins, to get on the floor, right? Like you saw Jaden McDaniels on the floor multiple times. You saw Shannon on the floor multiple times. You saw Nas Reed getting downhill, bumping, banging, being ultra aggressive. You saw Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert, like fighting for those loose balls, fighting to win every possession that they possibly could. And you didn't see that in Joker, right? And you didn't see that in Joker specifically throughout the course of this entire series. And I think that says a lot about a team that's you're going to allow a team to come in, be more physical than you, dominate you on the boards, dominate you on the margins, and your best player isn't going to push back. He's going to, for one, be terrible defensively, but two, also on the offensive end of the floor where he's supposed to flourish, allow them to dictate the terms in which the game is played. Meaning, Minnesota dictated the physicality, they dictated the way the series was going to be played, and Joker just allowed for that. Now, Jamal Murray, I give a little bit more leniency to for one reason. One, he's not the best player, right? He's not the guy who's in these all-time conversations that everybody throws, Joker into. And he had a, maybe top 5 perimeter defender on him this entire series, hawking him down, right? The way Jaden McDaniels was fighting through screens, the length that he has at 6'10, the way he can move his feet against Jamal Murray, who isn't, like an off the page athlete who's not going to beat guys off the dribble. And, he's going to play a more calculated skill based game. That's a tough matchup for a guy like that, right? And I think when your engine and Joker isn't going, it's going to make Murray's game exponentially harder. You know what I'm saying? So even though I felt like Murray, defensively, he was barbecue chicken throughout the course of this entire series, and Joker was as well. mm, I, I I give more fault to Joker, right? And I think we have to when we're looking at who the best, the hierarchy of that team and who the best players and who's in those discussions. That I've heard Joker be talked about as like a top 3 center all time, right? And center's like the deepest position in NBA history. You know what I'm saying? So, with all that being said, man, I think we just have to be critical. We have to be critical. And I've heard people bring up like this series being worse than LeBron's 2011 2011 final series. And I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment, but there's a large part of me that wants to agree with that. Right? There's a large part of me that wants to agree with that because if you watch this series, Joker's defense was so disgracefully bad that I don't know how you can get over that as a fan of the game, right? Like his inability to contest shots, or I don't even want to say an inability because you're 6'11, 300 pounds. Like, step over and just be vertical. Every time I watch Joker play on the defensive end of the floor, I get so confused because it's not that he cannot contest shots at the rim. It literally, as I just put it, it's an unwillingness to contest shots at the rim. Now, he isn't the tallest, he isn't the most athletic, but if you've ever played basketball before, if you have a guy who meets you at the lane, right? Like if Joker's there early on a defensive rotation and he just stands there, doesn't even jump, and is vertical with his hand straight up. Do you know how hard it is to finish over a 6'11, 300-pound guy who's just going to stand vertical right here, right? Unless you're an insane athlete who can jump over him and just put him in the rim, which there's not many guys who can do that. I know it's the NBA, there's a ton of great athletes, but still, right? When you have a guy who's as physically strong as Joker, and if he's in those rotations, like it's hard, but he just doesn't do it, right? If he sees dribble penetration, he makes a concerted effort all the time just to get out of the way, right? Just to get out of the way and not even contest a shot. And you cannot do that as the center of a team who's trying to make deep playoff runs, right? Because you're putting your team at just such a big disadvantage. Guys are going to get beat off the dribble. The NBA is too good. There's too good athletes. There's too many great shot creators who are ultra quick to not have any backline defense. And if Aaron Gordon's not on the court, there is absolutely no backline defense out of the Nuggets, and more specifically out of Nikola Jokic. And It's disgraceful to watch. Now, Murray also. Now, we talked about offense, right? I'm not going to give Murray as much of the blame on that side of the ball. Defensively, Murray, you get a lot of it too, right? Now, I know you don't have all the physical tools similar to Jokic, but when teams are literally hunting you, and Minnesota Timberwolves, every time they saw Jamal Murray on them down the stretch in yesterday's game, they said, "We're going at you. We're going at you." Whether it was Jaden McDaniels, whether it was Terrence Shannon, Mike Conley was trying to get after him, Nas Reed was trying to get after him. Don't let Julius Randle get switched on to him because you know what's happening there. He's putting that boy in the cup. And they just attack, 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 attack. Let me tell you something right now. You can't be bad on offense and bad on defense. You got to pick a struggle, right? And his struggle was both, and that just can't be the reality. You shot like 4 for 20 from the field, and then you're getting fried every time down. The Minnesota Timberwolves see just blood in the water when you were on the court defensively, and they're just hunting you possession after possession. And then you come down and you're bricking shots, you're bricking shots, you're bricking shots, making turnovers, all this sort of stuff. It just, I can't say enough how painful it was to watch just the lack of effort, the lack of will, the lack of fight that the Denver Nuggets had. And then on the flip side, to be so impressed with all the opposite traits that Minnesota came with, right? How much effort they played with, how they weren't deterred in the slightest by losing their best player, a guy who's a perennial now, first team all NBA type of player, and say, you know what, that's no sweat off our back. We lose our starting two guard, who's a huge rotation piece for us, and Dante DiVincenzo. By the way, hope he recovers well and he gets back to where he was. And it's just amazing, man. And the game of basketball is it's an amazing game to watch because you just really never know. Like I said, going into that series, I was sure Denver was going to win. And the main reason again is just because the level of effort that Minnesota came out of the regular season with. I just didn't think a team whose best player is 24, who key rotation pieces are all under 25, was going to be able to flip the switch like that. Like that's LeBron second sitting Cleveland type of switch flip. But they did it, man. They did it, and you gotta tip your caps to them. And dare I say, this Minnesota team that we just saw punked the Denver Nuggets, which they punked the Denver Nuggets. If they were healthy going into this Spurs series, which will be their next round, I think that series could be very interesting, right? Because they have the physicality, they have the length, they have the athleticism, they have the ability to get downhill and challenge Wemby at the rim to really make it interesting. Now, without Anthony Edwards, without the shooting of Dante, I think ultimately it is going to be really tough for them. Just because Wemby just covers so many holes on the defensive end of the floor, and you have a perimeter defense like the San Antonio Spurs that can really just put pressure on the ball, and they're not like matchups mean so much, right? And you're going to get consistent contest at the rim out of San Antonio because that's what Wemby does. You're going to get guys who can keep you in front. So there's no hunting mismatches like there was against Jamal Murray. So the dynamics of the series changed quite a bit. But even with that, I think just the level of dog that Minnesota has, right? If they were fully healthy, I think that could be a 6 or 7 game series with San Antonio. As is, I think it'll probably go 5 just because I don't know if they're going to be able to generate enough points with Anthony Edwards off the floor, their primary creator off the floor to, win close games versus San Antonio. I think they're physical enough, they're athletic enough to keep games close. But once you get into that fourth quarter and games become more, isolation heavy, and you're more reliant on, individuals making plays. I don't know how they sustain that. I don't know how to sustain that. But there is a potential that Ant could come back maybe by like game 3 or 4, I think, right? Depending on how his knee progresses. So maybe if he comes back, but as is the way the team's structured, assuming that they get Io DeSumo back. Was someone else sitting out last night? I think there was one more guy who was sitting out last night. But either way, I think they could get one win off the Spurs and make it a competitive 5 games. But I don't think they could stretch it out any more than that. But let me know what you guys think about that. And I want to get into just outside of this playoff specifically, more the broader Joker talks, the rooms that he's put himself into, winning 3 MVPs, being an NBA championship. And, I've been somebody who has been last on the Joker train in terms of him being the best player in the NBA, right? I was late to the party. I think a lot of people like 2022, 2023 is when they had Joker as the best player in the NBA. And it took a while for me to move off Giannis, right? To the point where I didn't start to agree with people that Joker was the best player in the NBA until last season, 2024-25. And the reason is because one, Giannis covers so many holes for his team, right? Like the even if Joker, in the regular season especially, is a better offensive player than Giannis, I don't think the gap is as large as the defensive gap that Giannis provides for his team. Right. So even if I concede that Joker is a better offensive player, which I do think especially prime Joker is, um, I think the defensive gap is so wide, and Giannis is so much more well-rounded that I think he makes up for it in that instance, right? And that's one of the reasons why I pushed back so much on the idea that that the Joker had surpassed Giannis as the best player in the NBA. But accumulated injuries, being uncertain about Giannis and his future, with all those injuries and him just being more of an athletic force bringing player, I conceded. I conceded last year, and I'm not proud of it. But let me tell you something. When you play a series like what we just saw Joker play, I think some revisionist history should be allowed. Right? I think we should be able to go back and we should be able to start to rewrite some things because that series is unjustifiable. Right? I don't think there's any excuse that you could make, any way you could try and pin it on his teammates, his coaching. There is nothing you can say to me to convince me that that series and the way it went was not fully Joker's. No, it's a team sport, right? But like the way Joker played specifically was not entirely 1,000% Joker's fault. And when you were the best player on the team, you obviously are the engine, right? You were the one who get your team going. And Joker got nothing easy, so he created nothing easy for his team, and that was the series right there, right? Like if Joker cannot create offense for his teammates, for himself and his teammates, then everything else goes out the window. And his just lack of competitiveness of backbone, it looked like he was ready just to go back to Serbia and play with his horses for large parts of that series, right? Like that's how I felt watching the way these guys competed and how regularly they just got punked possession after possession. And that's why I chose this picture, right? Joker getting hemmed up by a dude who's about 100 pounds lighter than him and just, shrinking in these moments is absolutely insane to me. So getting back to my point about the Giannis debate, et cetera, et cetera, I think it's worth some revisionist history. Now, this isn't me saying that I don't think Joker was ever the best player in the NBA. I think there was, moments and pockets that he was. But I also think when we're talking about who the best players, when we're talking about all-time rankings, when we're talking about these things that are largely subjective, I think we have to be better about being being honest and being able to critically think about situations. Because I think far too often when we're having these discussions, we allow situation to ultimately dictate who the best is, who's best, who isn't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what I mean by that is, Joker over the course of the last 4 seasons has been in much better situations than Giannis has, whether it be because Giannis was injured, whether it be because trade, whether it be because Giannis's teammates were injured and Dame and him not being able to be healthy at the same time. Um, I think that's largely what came down to the difference in why Joker was able to win more, be more competitive, get out of these first round matchups, et cetera, et cetera. Um, because I don't think it had anything to do with their individual play. Because when I watched these guys play, when I watched Giannis on the court, throughout the course of the last 3 or so seasons, um, when he's playing, I still don't know if Joker is better than him, right? Like when Giannis is playing, now I know people say the best ability is availability, but I just don't know how to factor that in, and I want to be honest about that because when I see Giannis on the court, I still see a guy who I personally think is, I would choose over Joker in a lot of ways, because like a series like this isn't happening with Giannis on the court, right? Like he is going to match the level of intensity that any team is able to put on the court. He's not going to be punked ever, right? He may lose, right? He may struggle offensively, shoot bad from the field, but he's not going to get outwilled, right? He's not going to get outfought. He's not going to get outcompeted. You know what I'm saying? It's just not going to happen. So in saying all that, I'm not again, I don't want to say that, I don't want to just go rewrite all of history. There were moments where Joker was the best player in the NBA, but I think when we're just having these conversations, we just have to be better about assessing what's going on in situations and be honest about that. And I'll go as far to say, when we're talking about, who the best player in the NBA is now, I think, Shea is in, and I think it's pretty widely accepted right now, especially after that series. I would assume that Shea's the best player in the NBA, and I think even Shea, right? Like you got to be honest about Shea being in like the perfect situation for his skill set, right? But when I break down players as individuals, and when I line up Shea versus Luca versus Wimby, like I think it becomes a lot harder to decide, right? I think these margins are very close. Like the impact that Wimby has on the defensive end of the floor closes the gap very quickly versus anybody else who's in the NBA right now, right? Like at 22 years old, he legitimately might be the best player in the NBA at this point in his career. And I think when we're having these discussions, we just have to be more cognizant of that. Really start to think through some of these things, and it'll just make these conversations more authentic. You know what I'm saying? It'll make these conversations mean a little bit more if we're able to really focus on the player as opposed to the situation, as opposed to the team success as the validity behind somebody's case as the best in the world, right? So that's just where I'm at with it, guys. That's where I'm at with it. I think Joker, after you have a series like that, after you have a season like that, where you started out the season great, right? We're talking about historic levels of play, get injured, and then you come back from that injury, you're just never quite the same. We want to give some grace around that. Maybe he just had a really hard time coming back from that injury. And I do think a guy like him, who's built like him, heavier set, not as athletic. So the little bit of athleticism he does have, you probably just need more. You know what I'm saying? It probably matters more. So maybe we could just chalk it up to an unfortunate injury that ultimately didn't allow him enough time to get back to the Joker that we're used to. But I think a series like that, man, when you just can't give too many excuses. You can't give too many excuses. The Timberwolves were down their best player. They were down like two or three other guys throughout the course of that series. Joker was on the court. Murray was on the court. Your two best players were on the court. You were playing better heading into the playoffs, right? Like you were the better team. You were the favorites. There's just really no excuses. There's really not. I'm trying in my head. I'm trying to be fair, but it was just such a bad series. It was such a disappointing series that we just got to be honest about it. We got to be ultra critical about it. I think Joker, if he still had a claim to being the best player in the world heading into the playoffs, I think he doesn't now, right? Like I think that's how far I'm willing to take it. Um, and with the way Wimby's coming up, with the way Shea is holding his spot and just dominating, and as we, are kind of scanning the lay of the land right now, Shea and Wimby are kind of on a collision course for that conference finals. And if the Spurs can stay, if both teams can stay healthy, that should be honestly probably the championship. You know what I'm saying? Like that. Because I think a lot of us thought Denver. I think a lot of us thought Boston was going to be able to put something together, but them going seven with the Sixers is making me rethink some stuff. And maybe it's just the Embiid um, matchup, because him getting put back on that court has really made the difference for the Sixers. But outside, I really don't see a team outside of what I thought Boston could do being able to contend with the Spurs or the Oklahoma City Thunder, whoever ends up making it out of the West. From what I'm seeing right now, right? Like Detroit, they may lose in six to Orlando, right? And I thought defensively and athletically, physicality wise, they could keep up with both those teams. But I just think we're seeing right now in the way the playoffs are played, even if they somehow by miracle made it through the East, how are they going to generate enough offense to compete with one of those two teams, right? Because those two teams both have excellent defenses, but they can also put the ball in the hole at a very high level. You know what I'm saying? So, and who else? Cleveland. Yeah, Cleveland. I don't see it too inconsistent. The Knicks are the other team where I'd be interested because I think they have the talent to match up with those guys. But I also think if they match up with a team like the Spurs or OKC, Jalen Brunson's going to have to do so much work. He's going to have such a hard task in front of him because he has to produce offensively, and it's just hard to produce offensively as a guard versus those teams. And the way that they use Cat is just not one, not something that I think is the way that I think they should. Cat should be more of a prominent figure on that Knicks offense. I don't know, man. I don't know. The playoffs have been crazy. Honestly, I think what's going to end up happening is, you know, we're going to have Spurs versus Minnesota second round. We're going to have OKC versus whoever wins out of the Lakers and the Rockets. By the way, as a Lakers fan, I wouldn't be surprised if this series goes seven and Rockets found a way to win, right? Just with the way the Lakers are constructed. Um, how little margin for error we have right now with Luka Doncic being out, even when Luka's on the court, right? Like this team, just with the lack of athleticism that we have, our margin for error already is small. And then that gets magnified when Luka's not on the court. Austin Reeves isn't on the court, even though he just came back last game. Um, so I wouldn't be surprised, right? I think this is a odd predicament where it could happen. Now, I'm hoping that the Lakers close them out in Houston tonight, but that remains to be seen. We'll see there, and I'll do another live or another video talking more specifically about the Lakers and Houston series. But either way, point being, right? OKC is going to have to play Houston or the Lakers. I think OKC gets both of those teams out of there relatively quickly. I think the Spurs get Minnesota out of there relatively quickly. Now, with how competitive and how hard Minnesota fights, I see them making those 5 games, right? I think they can win one off the Spurs and make it like a competitive 5 games, but it's still going to be a 5 game series. You know what I'm saying? And I think the Lakers or Houston could probably get a game off OKC, but there's going to be some blowouts intermingled in there as well, where OKC beats the Lakers by like 25, like they were doing in the regular season. I think the nature of the playoffs will keep those games closer because, um, you know, games get more physical. They come out and they become more played in the half court and stuff like that. So I think the margin will be a little bit less. So they won't be as ugly as they were in the regular season, especially if the Lakers make it through. Um, but still, like I think OKC should get through that series relatively easy. I think the Spurs should get through that series relatively easy. And honestly, based on how the East is playing out right now, what we've seen in inconsistencies out of the Knicks, out of Boston, um, out of Cleveland, who I thought would be a real player if they could get the stars to align. I think the Western Conference Finals is going to be the real NBA Finals, and then whoever makes it out of the East is probably going to struggle with whoever wins out of San Antonio and OKC. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know how you guys are feeling about the NBA playoffs. Leave comments, leave me messages. That whole thing. I love to engage. I love to talk about hoops, man. That's what we're here to do. It's been a lot of fun. And just to recap really quickly, absolutely, just to say it one more time, reiterate it one more time. Absolutely despicable play out of the Denver Nuggets, right? Out of the two best players on the Denver Nuggets, more specifically, right? Out of Nikola Jokic, out of Jamal Murray. Horrendous play. Horrendous play. I don't care if you look at the stats and you see the Joker had, averaged a near triple double. If you watch that series, the impact that he had on the game was minimal. It was minimal in comparison to what he normally does in the regular season. It was minimal in comparison to our expectations of Joker. It is minimal in compared to the conversations that he gets thrown into, sometimes what feels like undeservingly so at this point in his career. I know he's a 3-time MVP, guys, but my goodness, you couldn't have played a worse defensive series than what I just saw out of Joker and what I just saw out of Murray. And in addition to that, the offensive impact just wasn't there, right? The offensive impact just wasn't there as it normally is there. And these guys to deserve to be criticized, right? They deserve to be criticized, especially if you're gonna try to interject someone like Nikola Jokic into some of the conversations that he gets thrown into, right? If you're gonna talk about him like he's a top 10 player of all time, a top 15, a top 20 player of all time, wherever you put him, then you have to criticize him like he's a top 10, 15, 20 player. And you have to hold him to a certain level of expectation, right? We can't let Joker off the hook. This is one of the worst series I've seen played out of an, quote unquote, all time NBA player, right? It's right up there with LeBron 2011. And LeBron was at least playing high level defense. You know what I'm saying? Joker wasn't, right? So even though Joker's offensive metrics look a little bit better, right? Like Joker wasn't playing all time defense. Not to mention LeBron did that in the finals, right? So he had 3 series, beforehand where he was playing really high level basketball. Joker round one versus a team that you were favored against. You know what I'm saying? Round one versus a team whose best player was off the court and who's a perennial top 10, top 7 NBA player in the league, right? Uh, you know, that was a first round series versus a team who had lost their starting two guard to an Achilles injury in game three. You know what I'm saying? Like the list goes on, or game four, whatever it was. Um, they didn't have key role players who was leading the team in scoring after winning them a game and scoring 43 in a game in Io DeSumo last night. Didn't matter, right? It didn't matter. They won by committee. Gobert held up in his end of the bargain. Julius held up his end. Jaden McDaniels played like an all-star last night. Mike Conley came in and gave you valuable minutes, turned back the clock in some spots, and played really good basketball. Um, Shannon, is it Terrence Shannon? He came out and he gave some really good minutes as well, right? Like, my goodness, right? You got some awesome production for some awesome players and a team who just played like they had something to prove versus a team who played like they had already accomplished everything that they needed to accomplish, and they got punked for it. They got punked. There's no excuse for it. The Denver Nuggets need to go into this offseason and really do some thinking, right? They really need to do some thinking. They really need to do some roster reconstruction because this was supposed to be the Denver Nuggets' best roster, better roster than their championship team, right? You add Cam Johnson, you add Tim Hardaway Jr., you add Bruce Bound, who was on the team back when you won the championship. You add Jonas Valanciunas, who is one of the best backup bigs in the NBA over the course of the past like 5 or 6 seasons. Um, Peyton Watson all of a sudden just has a breakout year and he's averaging 20 when he's healthy. Now he wasn't there, but that's not an excuse, right? Because Minnesota had their injuries as well, right? So the best team that you have ever had when on paper, when you look at that roster, got crushed, got punked, got beat in the first round of the NBA playoffs as the favorite going into the series. I cannot say how bad that is, right? Like, I can't overstate enough how bad that is. And you really need to take that into consideration. So, how they move forward, I don't know. They got some pretty weird contracts. Like a guy like Aaron Gordon, I think would be a very valuable contract to a lot of teams if his injury history over the past 2.5, 3 seasons wasn't what it was. To be honest with you guys, and this is an idea that I've just been thinking of. I thought about it last year when Giannis's name, started coming up in trade rumors again. Could Denver be a team that went after Giannis? And how would that work? Because I think, and the only reason I say this, right? The only reason I say this is because Giannis covers a lot of the holes that Joker has, right? Defensively, he covers all those holes. He can be a great weak side defender, a guy who can test at the rim. Giannis, an all-time great help side defender, right? Without a question of a doubt, he's an all-time great. Um, Help side defender. And then you mix it on the offensive end of the floor. He's a guy who's willing to attack, attack, attack. And that's something that really hurt Denver in this series because Joker is just not an attacker, right? He's a guy who has to allow the game to come to him and he's going to go when like he deems appropriately, right? Or when the defense breaks down and he has opportunity to, right? Like he's not going to take the game into his own hands and Giannis will. So I think honestly those two could work. And then you got Joker who could extend the floor a little bit. He could pass the ball really well. And I think Giannis could play off that terrifically. So just like a you know, uh, thought process here. Could The only thing is I don't know if Denver would want to give up Peyton Watson, but I think it may be worth it if you're just trying to maximize Jokic's like winning window, right? He probably only has 2 more years, 3 more years and Giannis as well of like high level top 5 in the NBA potential caliber basketball. So pair these two together, you know, you'll probably have to trade a mixture of like Peyton Watson and Murray and Peyton Watson and Gordon in order to make the money work. But would you consider that? Would you consider trading Peyton Watson, one of your other 2 out of 3 stars, or one out of your 3 stars. So you got Peyton Watson and Murray, or Peyton Watson and Gordon, plus like a lot of draft capital to get Giannis. Would you do that? Because to be honest with you, I think the Spurs, like as much as I wanted Giannis to get traded to the Spurs, I just don't think the Spurs are going to do that because their timelines are so different. You know what I'm saying? If um, Milwaukee was willing to take back De'Aaron Fox, and I think the Spurs would consider it. But if they want a guy like Dylan Harper, or if they want a guy like Stephon Castle, I just don't think the Spurs are going to do it, just because those two fit with Wemby's timeline so well. So a team like Denver could potentially work in a trade, right? Because, Milwaukee can absorb one of those bigger contracts to make the money work. You get a star, caliber player. You get a guy who's an all-star caliber player, but you also get some young talent in Peyton Watson, who what he showed, right? He showed that he has, all-star potential down the road potentially. You know what I'm saying? Like he could end up being, like a 24 and 8 guy, 24 8 boards, high level defense, right? A guy who's making all star teams every couple of years or something like that. And you also get some draft capital, right? Or maybe it's a 3-team trade where another team's given some draft capital or something like that. I think it could work. I think it could work. Now, I don't know. I also don't know. The only thing, like in terms of play style on the court, I think it could work very well. The only other area that I'd be uncertain of is like, do Giannis and Joker's mentalities match? Because it seems like Joker's just like so nonchalant about stuff. Would that cause friction between how Giannis is? Because we know how Giannis is, and that's why Giannis is one of my favorite players. He's a go getter. He's getting after it. He's trying to compete at the highest level every day, and he's going to bring that fire. He's like a 6'11" Russell Westbrook. You know what I'm saying? The way how fiery he is, and the way he just competes. So that would be my only concern about that. But I do think Denver should explore something like that. If you're really trying to maximize Jokic's window, I would explore what a Giannis trade might look like. And maybe they'd be um, Milwaukee would be willing to do a deal for a guy like Murray or Gordon, because you can then flip that to more draft capital, more pieces, something like that, right? Because Aaron Gordon, even though he has a injury history, if he's on the open market, like he's probably one of the most coveted role players in the NBA right now. The fact that he shoots 40% from three, the fact that he could be your backbone on the defensive end of the floor, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot to like about Aaron Gordon. So I wouldn't be surprised if Denver tried to do something drastic like that. And to be real, you have to, right? You have to. You got a guy like Joker who you feel like is a, top 5 center of all time, or whatever people say about him. I would push back on that a little bit, but regardless, right? Like an all timer, and you're trying to maximize, similar to like what we saw the Warriors try and do, just make every possible move to put a winner around this guy. I think it's worth considering. I think it's worth considering and seeing if you can go out there and maybe trade for a Giannis. Right now, I know again, I know there are some young teams, but I think if you're willing to trade Peyton Watson, it makes things interesting, because now you have a young talent who's an all-star caliber player, potential all-star caliber player down the road, um, and then some draft capital, a couple first-round picks, maybe like 3, um, to make that a really appealing offer, right? A really appealing offer. So let me go know what you guys think. Just wanted to spend some time talking about the Denver Nuggets and this series, Denver more broadly, Denver's future. Um, Criticize them because they deserve a lot of criticism coming off of that series, right? Like I think Denver deserves to be getting brutalized by the media a little bit, just to be fair. If we're going to hold these guys, everybody to the same standard, then I think it's fair, because, LeBron would have been getting cooked. If LeBron at 41, with his best player hurt, with his second best player hurt for a lot of the series, um, winds up losing this series, right, to a team that was, going in was everybody thought was going to win anyways, right? LeBron's going to hear no end of this at 41, right? At 41 years old, LeBron's going to hear no end of it. So I want to keep that same energy for these guys, and they deserve to get absolutely cooked. So everybody, let's poop on the Denver Nuggets today. Let's criticize them as much as possible, because they deserve it, right? And I feel like the Denver Nuggets, specifically Joker, gets shielded by his fans quite a bit from criticism, when that's not the way it should go. And then then we could, a week or so from now, we could be a little bit more graceful, and we could start to talk about, Denver Joker as an all-time great again. But for now, we got to get after him. We got to get after him, because that was disgraceful. But wish you guys the best. Appreciate the time. and I'll be on here doing another live soon. Peace.